Hey folks, welcome to Lawfare Live. It's January 30th, 2025. It's 4 p.m. and I am here with Lawfare senior editors Quinta Jurecic, Roger Parloff, and we're going to be joined by Anna Bauer and Renee DiResta shortly. We've got a bunch of hearings that took place today. Before the Senate Intelligence Committee, we had Tulsi Gabbard, who is there as the nominee to be the Director of National Intelligence. Before the Senate Health Committee, we had Robert F. Kennedy, who yesterday testified before the Finance Committee. And of course, before the Senate Judiciary Committee, we had Kash Patel, who testified for a number of hours, which just wrapped up about an hour ago. So we got a lot of material to cover. Let's start with Tulsi Gabbard. Quinta Jurecic, give us an overview. What did she talk about? What kind of an impression did she make? And how long did it go before they went into closed session?
So for listeners who might be somewhat lost amid the flurry of colorful nominees, I think it might be worth a refresher. So Gabbard is a former House representative from Hawaii. She, I think, has gained a fair amount of notoriety, let's say, in the sort of DC foreign policy space for being someone who was originally a Democrat, had sort of moved away from the party, and in recent years had started advocating views that sort of were in line with criticism that has been voiced of US foreign policy on RT, for example. She'd also, during the Syrian civil war, had been an early voice suggesting that there wasn't enough evidence that Bashar al-Assad had gassed his own citizens, that kind of thing. And she's also someone who had expressed a sort of Trump style, let's say, skepticism toward the intelligence community, veering strongly toward the conspiratorial. So she was always going to be someone who I think was going to have a more difficult time. And I think we saw that on the hearing today. So she, came in and seemed very polished. She was introduced, interestingly, by Senator Joni Ernst, but also by former Senator Richard Burr, who was the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Which he shared with distinction. He was
Yes, and I was going to say who I
essay.
had not realized had fully gone insane. So during Burr's time chairing the Intelligence Committee, he had, presided over the investigation of Russian election interference, a fact that Renee is familiar with. And yeah, and had, as you say, Ben, had done so in I think, scrupulously fair, bipartisan, apolitical manner, with someone who I actually thought came out of that period looking really good. And then in recent years, so there had been a scandal about insider trading that forced him to step down from his leadership of the committee. And then he left the Senate, and now he, came out there, was sort of buddy-buddy with the other senators, and made a bunch of comments saying, I'm familiar with the Russia investigation and Russia's efforts to interfere in US elections. And so I recognized it when I saw all of these lies being peddled about Tulsi Gabbard, which is sort of a bit of a backflip and not a connection you would expect to hear. And saying there had been a coordinated attack on her, and that he was here to defend her. So right out of the bat, I think that was representative of kind of the strange bedfellows happening here. Gabbard, I would say, was very smooth, was very polished. She had a,
He always is.
all white outfit.
She's a
Sorry.
very she's a very smooth, polished
Yes.
presenter, which is one of the reasons that she's been, such an effective television presenter figure over the years.
That's right. I mean, and she really seemed to mostly be very sort of smooth and in control, with an exception that I'll get to in a minute. Um, I had been curious whether she was going to try to play down the conspiracism or play it up. Do you want to try to get all the Republicans on board by really doubling down on sort of the far out positions that maybe attracted Trump to you in the first place, or do you want to play that down and appear as more of a kind of a bipartisan figure? And she played it up. Her opening statement, she launched in, after a little bit of introduction, she was saying, that the intelligence community has been politicized by Trump's opponents. She name dropped the Carter Page FISA, although she did successfully identify it correctly as under Title I. So there's a small victory for accuracy. She sort of mixed in legitimate criticisms of the intelligence community, or criticisms that are sort of within the realm of fact, let's say, um, with criticisms that are in the realm of sort of conspiracy theory. Um, and really was trying to sort of align herself with Trump, saying, I've been persecuted just like he's been persecuted for, my actions, and my beliefs. So right out of the bat, I think the first question was from Committee Chair Tom Cotton on the Hunter Biden laptop, who asked if whether she would commit that no one who abuses their credentials in that fashion would have a clearance. He attacked John Bolton as well, interestingly. And Gabbard, was all in on that. And so from there, I think there was this sort of bizarre ping-ponging over the course of the hearing, where some of the senators were in a hearing that was a really boring hearing for DNI, where the main thing that they were concerned about was, uh, the size of ODNI and how it should interact with different components of the intelligence community, and sort of, legitimate but very technical and bureaucratic questions. Um, and then there was this sort of other parallel, and so most of those were Republicans, to be clear. Then there was this other parallel hearing where senators on both sides of the aisle were asking her about some of her less typical positions, let's say. So there were disputes over her position on Section 702, which she'd previously indicated she did not support. Then she said that she does support it now after reforms, although Senator Warner pointed out she'd attacked those reforms when they were initially made, so it's not clear. There's also disagreement among
And did she
senators on the
appear to
panel.
understand what the statute is and what it does? Or did she just appear to have a sense? Because I was struck in the Kash Patel hearing that he had this relatively substantial colloquy with, and this is somebody who's worked at NSD and has used the statute, presumably. He didn't seem to understand how it worked, which actually surprised me given his background. Did Tulsi Gabbard seem to be conversant in the statute, or did she merely seem to have, gone from a sort of hard left or whatever she used to be, opposition to intelligence authorities, to a now I'm running an intelligence agency, so I support them kind of thing?
I will say I am not a 702 expert, and it's so technical that I think it's often hard to kind of keep up with the disputes. She, at least, if she doesn't understand it, she did a decent job of faking it, is what I would say. I mean, she did have an extended back and forth with multiple senators about imposing a warrant requirement. She seemed to know what she was talking about there. Like I said, she did correctly identify the Page FISA as Title I instead of lumping it in with 702. So that with the caveat that, of course, she takes a position that puts her at odds with most of the members of the committee, with the exception of Senator Wyden, who seemed pleased with her approach there as a
Wait, so
Democrat.
she still before the committee favors a warrant requirement?
Yes, she did believe that there should be a warrant requirement. Um, yes.
That's interesting because if you say Title 702 is important, but it needs a warrant requirement, what you're really saying is, I don't believe in 702 as it's currently constituted. So now that's interesting. And it's interesting that she would have any votes for her on that committee, having taken that position, save Ron Wyden.
Right. So there's this, again, there's a strange bedfellows. I would have to go back and look at some of the specific back and forth with various senators about the warrant issue because she's very good at filibustering and not saying very much. Which brings me to the next part, the sort of parallel hearing. So there was this issue of 702. I think the main issue that really tripped her up was weirdly her position on Edward Snowden. And I say weird because, I mean, that has been one of the things that kind of puts her outside the mainstream. That she had sponsored legislation to drop the charges, arguing that the charges should be dropped against him. She had indicated that, she thought that he did valuable work in putting information out there, even though it was leaked. She called him brave and so on and so forth. It seems like if you're going to be put up for DNI, you might want to have like a response to that will satisfy the members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and she really didn't. So she was asked repeatedly. I saw Dustin Volz at the Wall Street Journal estimated, I think, 6 or 7 times by senators across the aisle. Do you consider Snowden to be a traitor? And every single time she could not answer
Using the specific word traitor or
yes.
different formulations of the
Specifically, she was asked, do you consider him to be a traitor in that formulation? And she was also asked essentially how do you plan to interact and gain the trust and good faith of the men and women of the intelligence community, given your support for Edward Snowden? And every single time she had this sort of very canned response of, Snowden broke the law, and would try to launch into these 4 different
Trump
points.
Is and Joe Biden
exactly,
and would as president, right?
Exactly, and would try to launch into these points about how as a DNI she would make sure there were avenues for whistleblowers to go through the appropriate channels, yada yada. But at no point did she actually say whether she considered him a traitor. Michael Bennet, who's a Democrat, really lost his temper at her. And yelled at a certain point, like, you need to answer the question. And also grilled her on her comments, kind of really, let's say, hedging on the responsibility for the war in Ukraine. But there were also, I mean, so a lot of Democrats obviously came out against her on that point. Senator Warner noted that Senator Cotton, who did not ask her about Snowden, had himself called Snowden a traitor. But there were Republicans, like I said. So Senator Lankford, who's a Republican, asked her, would you call Snowden a traitor? She didn't answer him. Senator Young from Indiana also asked the same question, asked her to acknowledge that Snowden harmed U.S. national security. She wouldn't do it. Both Lankford and Young had they did not have, Mark Warner or Michael Bennett's demeanor, which was pretty exasperated and aggressive. Like, they stayed pretty polite. But I was struck that they were really asking her to say, will you please just say this? And she wouldn't do it. And so, I mean, I don't want to prognosticate too much about whether or not she gets confirmed, like, who knows? But if I were her, I would be worried about how Young and Lankford might be voting on this.
And what about Cotton himself? I mean, on the one hand, he's a real Trump loyalist. On the other hand, he's been, I think, quite courageous on the TikTok stuff. And he's really not a shrinking violet on the Snowden category of stuff. Did he give any indication? And he seems to, I don't want to speak for his psyche, but he seems to hate lefties of the type that Tulsi at least has her origin story in. What did he, like, there's a real cultural mismatch between the Senate Intelligence Committee Republicans and Tulsi Gabbard. And I'm curious how, like, it shocks me that she could bridge that divide with Richard Burr of all people. But I'm curious how she did with the current. Like, was anybody seemed sympathetic to her, and Cotton in particular?
No, Cotton was all in on her. He started off saying, I'm terribly dismayed about the attacks on her integrity, and it's a terrible thing to do to say that, someone is an American, that kind of thing. And then really sort of queued her up with these softballs on, the Hunter Biden laptop. He attacked John Bolton for publishing this book rather than going through this pre-publication review process. He queued up the questions about, oh, let's talk about the size and particular role of ODNI. So he was really, and like I said, it was Warner who came in and said, I'll note that the chairman has been really harsh about Edward Snowden. So he was doing his best to paper over that uh, disjuncture as best he could. I actually thought it was pretty striking the way that he kind of really came out swinging in that way.
Super interesting. Did anybody else on the Republican side really show their hand? I mean, you mentioned that Lankford
Mhm.
was joined the chorus of people asking the Snowden question. Did anybody else tip hands in either direction?
So Senator Budd, who I believe is the person who is now holding JD Vance's seat. So he was all in. He was a big fan. Senator Rounds, also big fan of Gabbard. They sort of queued up, softballs like tell us about your service, right? Explain to us your position on whatever. Um, Senator Collins, I had been keeping an eye on because, of course, she is one of the swing votes. She had, sharp questions for Gabbard, but they weren't, or questions that could potentially have been sharp, but weren't worded in a sharp way. Now, I think some of that is just Susan Collins. Like she doesn't come
Right.
off as
It's hard to
particularly.
talk that slowly and be sharp at the same time.
Exactly. So, but she asked if she would recommend clemency for Snowden today. She asked about Gabbard's past efforts to amend the Espionage Act to make it more difficult to prosecute leaks of classified information in a sort of whistleblowing category, and seemed displeased about that, but she didn't push Gabbard on it. So I don't know how to read that. The other senator was Senator Moran, actually, um, who had asked her, really wanted to dig in on her relationship with Russia, and had asked her, how she understands Russia. So he asked, how do you see Russia as a threat to the US? And she gave this kind of very bland statement about how Russia was a strategic competitor. Um, then Moran said essentially, look, you've been sympathetic to Russia in the past. I want to make sure that we're not kind of giving Russia, I think the specific phrasing that he used was, I want to make sure that Russia does not get a pass. And Gabbard actually responded, not in a particularly heated way, but she led by saying, I'm offended by the question, which struck me as kind of a weird approach to take if you're trying to get votes, but she did it in such a kind of smooth, controlled manner that I really didn't know how to read that interaction. So I would say there's a cohort on the committee that is of Republicans, led by Cotton, who are, all in on Tulsi Gabbard and have set the cognitive dissonance aside. Um, there's the Democrats are clearly all against her. Wyden is sort of happy about her views on 702, but pushed her on other issues. And then there's this kind of question mark over a number of the Republicans on the panel who seemed really uncomfortable with a lot of her views, but didn't, go out there to sort of present themselves in a particularly adversarial posture, even though they were asking her genuinely tough questions that she didn't have good answers for.
Interesting. All right. Renee, let's turn to RFK Jr. In the spirit of weird red, brown, left, right horseshoe nominees. So he did his finance committee testimony yesterday and his health committee testimony today. A lot of that stuff in HHS is outside Lawfare's jurisdiction. The whole Medicare, Medicaid financing, Social Security, that's not in the jurisdiction of HHS. But there's this weird vaccine pandemic protection CDC stuff that we keep an eye on, and he seems to have strong views on. What did he talk about today, and how did he go over before the committee?
Yeah, so we had 2 days of RFK Jr. I will say that today felt very repetitive after watching yesterday from start to finish. Yesterday was, the 3.5 hour marathon. I think I would break it down into the same themes came up in both hearings. You had obviously his prior beliefs, his theories about vaccines, which are almost all wrong, and his issues with tying, his he aggressively tried to rewrite history, right? He was never an anti-vaxxer. He's always been pro-vaccines. He's just pro-safe vaccines. The same rhetoric that you've heard and seen from him for a very long time. But he also occasionally has slipped up and told the truth on podcasts and in some writings. And I will say that the senators who raised the vaccine questions in particular had those receipts in front of them. And so there were a number of these sort of contentious exchanges where they're saying, are you lying to us here, or were you lying to your audience then? Like, which is it? You can't hold all of these opinions simultaneously.
Sounds like Kash Patel.
Yes, based on and because they were all at the same time today, I couldn't actually watch the Kash Patel hearing.
That's why we have
I
Roger and
know.
me, and we've got we've division of labor.
Yep, I popped into to Tulsi's for 10 minutes trying to decide which to go with. Which one do you choose? A lot of so I mentioned obviously the vaccine thing. That was the very much front and center for a lot of people, Republicans included. His views on abortion came up quite a lot. He's had again sort of a flip flop on this. One of the things that he kept emphasizing was that he sees the role as executing President Trump's position. And so frequently he simply offered this sort of as a platitude. I have no opinions of my own. I'm sort of, I'll be executing the agenda of President Trump. This did not really seem to make a lot of senators happy. But the area that really stuck out for me was actually the basic competence questions. And these were the things like, as you allude to, Medicare, Medicaid, areas where I don't have deep familiarity in those issues. Most people don't. But if you're at a job interview to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services, particularly if you're a controversial figure who knows you're going to have to deal with adversarial questions about vaccines and your prior loony statements, you would think that you would prep very, very hard for what should be the softball questions about actually doing the job. The questions that he was going to get from the sympathetic Republicans who were not going to play the gotcha game. And instead, he could not even do that. And so you saw some pretty remarkable interactions yesterday with Senator Cassidy, who's considered kind of a swing vote here, Republican, also a physician, though, asking him questions about Medicare, Medicaid programs, and he can't really answer. He gets things wrong. He doesn't know the basics of what the programs are for what is ostensibly the most important part of the job he's actually interviewing for. And what I found most disturbing about that was, again, you could envision an opportunity if you're this person going into this sort of, lion's den, in which you can reframe all the Democrat criticism of your prior opinions as, derangement syndrome, if you are so on top of all the stuff that you need for the job. And instead what we got was very much this, if you or I were interviewing for an entry-level job, we would have been, that would have been the last interview. And there almost seemed to be kind of an arrogance to it. And this one way to read that is he didn't prep for the job interview because he's so convinced that he's a shoo-in. And that was the thing that really stuck out for me. This idea that you don't even have to pretend to understand the job you're being asked to do because you're so likely to get it. There is one other point that I'll make, which is he did have, the hall very much sort of flooded with the Maha moms. This is a thing that happens in almost every single anti-vaccine legislative hearing I've watched over the last 10 years. Really just that crowd of people booing and cheering in response to questions as they come up. So he has a passionate supporter base, and I have no doubt that he also thinks that makes him something of a shoo-in for this.
And how was he received? I mean, he's one of these nominees who has, as you mentioned, Republican opposition being led by former Vice President Mike Pence on the basis of his pro-choice or former pro-choice views. I'm honestly not sure which it is. And on the other hand, he's had some attraction from some Democrats like John Fetterman, who have indicated that also the governor of Colorado has made warm noises about him on grounds that they, see merit in some of his food safety and health stuff. I'm curious, looking at both committees, is this, I mean, obviously the center of gravity of the Democratic Party is going to oppose him. The center of gravity of the Republicans are going to support him. But do you see either Republican opposition as likely or Democratic support as likely for him?
So I think Bernie Sanders had been tossed around as a potential swing vote, a potential yes. After two kind of heated rounds with Bernie yesterday and today, I would be shocked to see Bernie actually go for it. He really did try to open the door, hey, we both mutually distrust pharmaceutical companies, and trying to get him to, he gave him sort of a soft open. He asked him about drug prices, about climate change. Is climate change a healthcare issue, or does Kennedy now believe it's a hoax? And he just kind of kept repeating this, my job is to make Americans healthy again. My job is to serve the agenda of the president. So it got kind of increasingly caustic. Cassidy was the one where I thought, okay, this is, if there's going to be a Republican senator who's really going to flip and could potentially take people with him, it is Cassidy, because of this experience that he has as a physician. Physicians were, right, I think even physicians who were inclined to say, okay, holding aside his beliefs, which are not many physicians, but those who were willing to say, okay, he can't really do that much damage to the vaccine program, were disappointed by his incompetence when it came to answering basic questions about Medicare and Medicaid. So I guess now we see, I've been checking Polymarket and things, and they still have them up at around 70% to be confirmed. So I came away feeling like it was more of a toss-up, but again, just the signal that came through, not even really bothering to prep, made me feel like he's absolutely certain he's going to get it, and that they're not going to, that the Republicans are not going to defy the presidential agenda on this.
And was either Mitch McConnell or Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski present at either of the hearings?
I think one of them was, I don't think McConnell was, or I wasn't, I couldn't tune in for the full.
Because I would be shocked if
day.
McConnell voted for
I think
Kennedy.
he's said that he's not going to. So, there is this sense of some of those folks being swing. One of them, Collins or Murkowski, I'm trying to recall which it was today, made some comments that seemed like not particularly favorable. So let me see if I
Gotcha. All right. With that, let us turn to Kash Patel, the star of the day. Roger, give us the overview.
Well, it was surprisingly, the questioning was, to my mind, surprisingly confined. there were a lot of subjects that could have come up that didn't, or that came up only glancingly. And it gave, certainly no Republican in the room was wavering at all. So if
True,
there's
although the Republicans that you would expect might vote against Kash Patel just aren't on the Judiciary Committee, which concentrates the most partisan of everybody.
yeah. Um, I'm old enough and naive enough that I still keep thinking that Lindsey Graham will oppose people like this, but he never does. But it was a different person that showed up than you have ever seen on podcasts or that you have ever read in any of his writings. I would say that 90% of what he said, if you believed it, you would be very happy with him as the nominee. He turns out he believes in the rule of law. He would never do anything that was illegal or against the Constitution, and he wants to depoliticize this organization. So he kept his composure for the most part. And the Republicans focused a lot. Well, of course, his Indian background, his hardworking, his parents were there, his sister was there. And how could you accuse him of associating with racists when, he's been subject to racial discrimination himself? There was a tremendous, the focus was, it was a given with the Republicans, of course, that the last 4 years of the DOJ and the FBI have both been weaponized and politicized. And so they need to be reformed. I was surprised how much focus there was on Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, even more, I would say, than on the prosecutions of Trump, although they got some attention. But Crossfire Hurricane was very much a big part of the Republican presentation. The Democrats, they focused to a surprising degree on the January 6th choir. I mean, I do think it makes sense. He was involved in putting together a tape that of the Star Spangled Banner that's being sung by about 6 detainees at the jail who are exceedingly violent January 6th defendants. And he professed to have no knowledge of the identities of any of those people. And to
have played no role in having it taped or anything involved in. He acknowledged that he promoted the tape.
Yeah, he said, I had nothing to do with the recording. I don't know any of the people involved. He said that the funds went only to the families of nonviolent January 6th defendants. So that was a little bit of a stretcher. I mean, the families, I guess where you define nonviolent gets fuzzy, but, the nonviolent offenders typically were either received no incarceration at all or 30 days or 60 days. So the people that need money are the people that are detained for years. And those people are not nonviolent. So there were mysteries. I would say his most common answers were he was confronted with a lot of the, exceedingly odd things he said on podcasts, things that sound like he's saying that the federal government was planning January 6th for a year, things about, there's one about closing down the FBI headquarters on day one and turning it into a museum. And his answers to almost all of those were, I don't have that full quote. I don't have that statement in front of me. That's a partial quotation. When asked if...
But in some of them, he's really said, that's not what I said, or that's not what the full quotation said. And I actually really thought he was, in some of those cases, he purports to not remember it specifically, but in some of them, he's just lying. I mean, like there's, where he said, that he didn't suggest that we should close down FBI headquarters and send people, and turn it into a museum of the deep state, that's a snippet taken out of context. He very much said that.
Yeah.
And I really was, look, I'm never one of the gotcha people who looks for perjuries in statements, and I'm not saying he said anything that could get him in trouble, but he showed a remarkable, what the FBI calls, lack of candor in his communications with the Bureau. And it is the kind of thing that would get an FBI agent fired.
Well, or for example, something that a Trump administration might seek to indict a deputy FBI director for, which is something that happened last time around.
But the subjects that we heard almost nothing about, one that I thought would be a big one was that Mark Esper, the former Secretary of Defense, had written in his memoir about an incident where they were trying to rescue a man who had been kidnapped from Niger into Nigeria, and SEAL Team 6 was going to get him. And allegedly, in Esper's account, Patel informed the Defense Department that Pompeo had said that they had obtained permission from Nigeria to fly over its airspace. And so the SEAL team is in the planes and they are on the way to the target, and they find out they don't have Nigeria's permission yet. And the planes have to turn around. They have to circle for an hour. The window of opportunity is ending. A crisis occurs. Do we go in without permission? Do we not go in and maybe they kill the hostage? Fortunately, at the last minute, Nigeria gives permission and so on. And what happened here, and in one version of this, with the Atlantic did some reporting on this, and in that version, the man at the Pentagon named Anthony Tata had confronted Patel afterwards, and had said, "What the fuck were you doing? You were, risking lives." And his answer was something like, "Well, it all turned out all right, so what the fuck does it matter?" But today, Tata submitted his own affidavit, and it's a completely different story, and it lauds Patel. So it's not really consistent with Esper's account, and so nobody really touched it except Alex Padilla. Another one.
Can I just mention something on this really quickly, which is that because I wrote about this in the piece that I wrote about Patel, and my piece was all based on public record stuff. So I just went off of the Esper account and then what Patel has said about it in his book. But I was looking after the hearing at the Atlantic piece and the reporter Elaine Plott, who back in August was kind of writing a Twitter thread about this. And she makes it very clear that it wasn't just Esper's account that she was reporting this story off of. She says that there were at least 2 sources who witnessed the confrontation that Tata had with Patel, who, had the same account of this happening. Esper also makes it clear in his memoir that Tata is a Trump loyalist to the equivalent that Patel is as well. And so I think that that's just some context that I think is important to put out there. So yeah, sorry, go ahead, Roger. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, and there are, in addition to the Atlantic story, there are other journalists who have reported this out and sort of and have concluded that Esper's version is well, that they have reported Esper's version. And like you say, and by the way, you should all read Anna's piece today, because it gives you much of the background, and you will see how much was left out of today's hearing. One other thing that there was only one reference in passing to a CNN story that apparently at some point there was a criminal referral against him, I think by the CIA, if I'm not getting that wrong. And only one person obliquely mentioned that there were issues about him going rogue and getting involved when he was, I think, with the working for Bolton nominally, and getting involved in Ukraine, even though that wasn't his bailiwick, and Fiona Hill had testified about that. He denies that. None of that came out. The other thing that I thought was really remarkable was a New York Times story. This was by Adam Goldman, Charlie Savage, and Eileen Sullivan pretty recently, I think. It does a close analysis of something he wrote in the book, Government Gangsters. And he goes on about his experience at DOJ, where he got disillusioned with the leadership, and when he was working on the Benghazi case. And in essence, he says that only one of the terrorists was prosecuted, and they sort of botched it, and he gets off lightly. And he knew, and they should have gone after about 18 of them, and they didn't, because somehow it would have embarrassed Hillary Clinton, or there was something like that, some theory in his mind. And the people there describe first, they say he exaggerates his role in the case, but more important, they say, it's very hard to get a terrorist like from Libya to a U.S. jurisdiction. And it's quite elaborate. You basically, you almost kidnap him. And so, yes, they were only able to get one initially, but they indicted 12 under seal. And eventually they got another. And that was why and he was never, and he says, they invited me to join the team, but I knew they were screwing it up. So I didn't want to, I refused. I knew they were going to botch it. And they say he was never invited. And then he says, and then they do botch it. But in reality, he gets 22 years. And later on, the appeals court increases that to 28 years. And so just every aspect of this story is, borderline hallucinated. It's grandiose. It's crazy. It's unhinged. And Now, I don't know why they didn't mention it. Maybe they think something about maybe they think it gets too far in the weeds. Nothing today.
Well, something that they did mention, Anna, and over and over and over again, is the issue of his grand jury testimony in what became the classified documents case. And it's clear that they made a strategic judgment. We're focusing on two things: the January 6th choir stuff and this grand jury testimony. What do you think is going on there? And how likely are they why do they care about it? And how likely do you think they are to get it?
Well, so Ben, I'm going to turn the question back around on you in a second after I say what I'm going to say, because I was going back and forth between the RFK and the Patel stuff all day. So I'm not entirely sure what the full scope of his answers to these questions were. But what I will say is that I think what is going on here, what we do know about Patel's involvement in the classified documents case is that he, at one point, as the probe was really kind of heating up in 2022, after the grand jury subpoenas started going out, that kind of thing, he made this statement to Breitbart News in which he claimed that Trump had declassified large kind of like in mass declassification order at the end of his presidency, and was making claims about the power of the president to declassify at will, all of this stuff. And it kind of came out of nowhere. And there was no corroboration as far as I'm aware of to this. And in fact, other administration officials have said that they're not aware of any kind of standing declassification order or in mass declassification. And so that's the background. Patel then got hauled before the grand jury. He pleaded the fifth. And then they eventually gave him immunity so that he was compelled to testify. And so I think that there's some questions about what exactly was going on with the declassification claims that Patel was making to Breitbart back in the spring. Ben, did you get a sense that that is what this was all about?
Yeah, my sense of it is that the Democrats have decided, rightly or wrongly, with knowledge or without knowledge, that what happened was that Patel was basically lying to Breitbart, told them that Trump had declassified this stuff, gets hauled in front of the grand jury, refuses to testify, gets immunized, and then has to admit that actually he was just talking out of his ass to Breitbart, and that he has absolutely no evidence that Trump actually declassified this stuff, which you would think Jack Smith's people would absolutely need that information to go forward with a prosecution, because without it, you don't know that Trump isn't going to call Kash Patel in defense. And so now they think, and I think they're probably right, that they have 3 days of Kash Patel testimony before a grand jury in which he basically acknowledges that none of this stuff, the relevant stuff anyway, was declassified. That's what I think they think is going on. And I think it's a plausible hypothesis. Along the way, what they got him to do was, first of all, acknowledge that he'd pleaded the fifth before a grand jury, which is not something you would normally expect an FBI director to do. And so I think there's a embarrass him a bit along the way thing going on. There's also an issue where they did get him to agree that he had no objection to the court releasing a transcript of it, which of course won't happen for a bunch of other reasons, including that there's probably all kinds of classified stuff in that grand jury transcript. But I think the point is that it allows a kind of procedural move on the part of the Democrats on the committee to ask Grassley at this point, okay, can we jointly go to Eileen Cannon and get that report released, at least for our review? I think that's the strategy here, but I don't know. It got more attention, honestly, than I expected it to, relative to some of the issues that Roger is talking about. I gotta say, I think it's unthinkable that they could vote to confirm him without hearing from Esper. But they're clearly, a majority of them are perfectly content to do that. Roger, what did you make of the grand jury stuff?
Of course, the Democrats did establish that, you know, whether or not you get the transcript, a witness, well, the Democrats said, whether or not you get the transcript, the grand jury rule 6E doesn't prevent witnesses from describing themselves from their memory what they said. There's a First Amendment right. There were a couple of responses, and of course he's urging transparency. So he said he declined to. I can't remember his language. He obviously wouldn't do that.
And I gotta say, I'm sympathetic to him on that. I would not characterize 3 days of grand jury testimony 2 years later under oath. That, like, you have to be crazy to do that. And so I actually, if I had been him, I would have said, you put a transcript of that in front of me, let me refresh my memory, and I'm happy to talk about it. But I can't do that blind.
Yeah. That was not his answer, but that may have been the reasoning behind whatever he did. That was his strategy.
Yeah. I want to open it up at this stage and see if any of you have questions for any of the others about hearings you didn't attend. I've been taking all the questions, but if you guys want to, like, Roger, the floor is yours.
I wanted to ask. Oh, I didn't mean to put my hand up. I guess I touched something inadvertently. But I will ask Renee, and I hope you didn't mention this already. I've been scattered. But is Sheldon Whitehouse, do we know how he's voting on RFK? I think you're muted.
He was an interesting one. I took notes on him yesterday. I came away feeling like he might actually vote to confirm. I found him to be sort of the most, a little bit alarming there. He seemed to make some kind of statement saying, like, reiterating his concern about vaccines, but then really moved very quickly into, like, how are you going to help the people of Rhode Island accomplish the following things that we want to see accomplished? And so it was kind of, he asked him to do something to make a strong statement related, disavowing vaccine denialism or something along those lines. Kennedy did not do that at all. And then he began to instead go down this road of how he could meet the needs of people in Rhode Island. So he, I believe, was getting deluged with phone calls and things. I heard that yesterday, people who were calling to request that he vote against were just, getting routed kind of straight to voicemail. So I think that that's where a lot of kind of pro-vaccine activists and people opposing the nomination have focused on shoring him up. And I guess we'll see what happens. For those who don't know, he was like a hiking buddy of, law school classmate, I think, if I'm not mistaken, who, there's this, these sort of articles about how they have this relationship where they go hiking and hunting together. And it was very much a personal relationship between them.
All right, Tracy, from the audience asks, it occurs to me that as I've been watching these confirmation hearings, the chairs of the Senate committees, especially the Intelligence Committee, are in a predicament. Even if they don't approve of the nominee, that in order to protect themselves for the future and for the committee's future work, they are outwardly supportive, but they are going to allow or encourage their Republican colleagues to go ahead and oppose the nominee. That way, the nominee is ultimately rejected, but their proposal, their personal influence with Trump is not diminished, or at least not so much. What do you think of this theory? Is it harebrained? So I'm going to actually ask Quinta to address it, since she's the one who is in a position where the committee chairman may be the least sympathetic to the nominee and yet is not showing it at all. So Quinta, what do you think of this theory?
I don't know. I don't see it. I mean, certainly it wasn't as if Cotton was like enforcing discipline on people to prevent them from asking questions. And I will say, our colleague Molly Reynolds is a much better reader of sort of how to divine meaning from congressional behavior than I am. But one of the striking things that I didn't mention is that Senator Kirsten Gillibrand went after Gabbard for opposing the TikTok ban. Cotton has been out there on Twitter really aggressively arguing for the TikTok ban and telling companies, you need to think very carefully before you allow TikTok, before you, allow TikTok in your app store, that kind of thing. He didn't say anything about TikTok as far as I could tell. So, I mean, it really seemed to me as if this is kind of just another example of, Republicans falling in line with the president's agenda. I will confess to some puzzlement about why among these three nominees they seem to be more on board with Patel than with Gabbard. Uh, I don't totally understand. I mean, to be clear, they're both completely unacceptable. But I mean, if you have three completely unacceptable nominees, it seems like everyone was really gung-ho on Patel, where there are actual doubts about Gabbard, and it's not obvious to me why that would be. So I mean, it really seems to me like it's just the kind of, members of Congress trying to figure out how much distance they can place between themselves and Trump before they start getting mean posts about them on Truth Social and death threats, right?
Yeah, can I just say really quickly, I have thoughts on this. I think that it's because Patel is much more of a MAGA darling. People are really enthusiastic about him within the far right. And I think that they're not enthusiastic about Tulsi in the same way. And I think that she is not as much of a kind of she's not as close to Trump as Patel is. Like, it's very clear to me that Patel and Trump are close, and I think that they probably think that a no on Tulsi is going to end up being better for them, both with the MAGA base and also with Trump, as opposed to Patel.
All right. Let us go. We've got only a minute left. So let's go down the row. Roger first, and tell us how many votes the nominee you followed is going to get on the Senate floor. We did pretty well with this the last time we played this game. Roger, how many votes does Kash Patel get?
Well, he's getting all the Republican votes on this committee, but I'm not really qualified with respect to the rest of the Senate to give a estimate.
I'm going to give you a very precise prediction. He will get 51 Republican votes. He's going to lose Murkowski and Collins, but he's going to get Mitch McConnell. And so he will scrape by. He will get no Democratic votes.
Do we have time for me to ask you a question, or will that?
Sure.
Because I was wondering what you thought about. There was Cory Booker said sort of an interesting thing about, and I hadn't heard this before, and he was saying that he's got information that Trump plans to appoint 5 political people to the FBI,
including some who are coming from SpaceX
and Elon Musk, under the level of, nominally under the level of Kash, and that this would be sort of unprecedented. And of course, Patel didn't seem thrilled with this. He said, he admitted he knew some of the names. He professed not to know anything about this plan. And of course, the whole charade is that, you know, he's a non-political appointee. And just in that context, one other thing that I thought Durbin said that was effective was that he placed this all in a context. You know, supposedly we're de-weaponizing, depoliticizing, but, you know, Congress in 1976 tried to depoliticize the FBI by saying, well, a director will stay for 10 years. And, you know, the only one who has violated that is Trump twice. You know, he fired Comey and
Clinton. Clinton removed Sessions. Although it wasn't Sessions was, you know, corrupt and needed to be removed. But there have been on that occasion other removals pre 10 years. Okay.
But then he pushed, but these are his own appointments that he's pushing out. And this is the second one.
Yeah, so I can, happy to address this. It would be a shocking thing to put a bunch of political appointees around the director. One of the striking things about the FBI when you walk into the building is that, you know, 100% of the people there, with the exception of the director, are career staff. And, you know, some of them, like the general counsel is kind of may come in from the outside, but they're not political appointees. They're you know, and the director sometimes has people who, for example, when Jim was running the FBI, Chuck Rosenberg came over to be his chief of staff, right? And so you have some people who are the director's people, but you have none of the president's people. And I don't know of an exception to that in FBI history, including, by the way, under J. Edgar Hoover, who was, of course, not a presidential appointee. He was the sort of founding father of the institution, but the institution has always jealously guarded, you know, it grows up its own people. And, you know, I like, it would be a shocking change if you surrounded the director with a bunch of basically presidential appointees. All right, Quinta, how many votes on the floor of the Senate is Tulsi Gabbard going to get?
I'm not gonna try to actually tally votes. I guess, I mean, here's what I'll say. It seems like Patel is clearly getting confirmed, which I honestly can't believe, but I guess that's where we are. I would not be surprised if Gabbard were confirmed, but I also wouldn't be surprised if she weren't. I'm not sure I would put it at 50-50. Maybe like 75-25, but it seems, I'm not sure whether it's more likely that Gabbard and RFK Jr. go down together or that one goes through and one doesn't, as a kind of, you know, you get one use of the free space. If one went down, I also, you can kind of argue for either one, right? For, you know, on the one hand, Gabbard is kind of Trump doesn't seem that committed to her. On the other hand, RFK, as Renee said, sort of there you can make a basic competence argument. So I suppose what I'm saying is that no outcome would surprise me here. I would be more surprised if both Gabbard and RFK were confirmed, and less surprised if neither or one of them, whichever one, wasn't.
Tulsi's going down.
We'll see.
48 votes to confirm her. She's going down. Renee, RFK.
You know, it's so tough. I feel like I'm just like hoping Bill Cassidy kind of talks to the caucus and says, like, we can do better than this. Like, this is the problem. The man has profound impact over the health of our children. I think he actually is, and it's an incredibly important thing. And I think that it's really going to come down to like one or two senators on the Republican side trying to say, like, come on, look, we can do better than this. I still am sort of at the 50-50 mark, and I feel like he squeaks through, but Cassidy seemed so disappointed in both hearings that I would be a little bit surprised if he didn't have at least 3 Republican defections. The question is really just if he gets the 4th.
Anna Bower, what is your prediction about both of the hearings that you dipped in and out of?
RFK, I think, squeaks through, but I'm a little like I'm not sure. I could be wrong. There could be 4. Patel makes it through.
We are going to leave it there on that cheerful note. Anna Bower's piece, the Patel dossier, is worth your time today, although it'll take a lot of it.
Can I say that it did take a really long time to write? It's like very lengthy, but I truly do think that reading it gives you a better sense of exactly how wild it is that Patel is under consideration for this job.
Yes, and and just how much was left out of today's hearing, but also how difficult a job it would have been since there are no Republicans who are interested in the project, for the Democrats to have mounted a substantial effort today, or a more broad-based effort, because the material, it is so vast, the material. Check your phone for bugs, and and then do it again tomorrow. We are going to leave it there. Anna Bower, Roger Parloff, Quinta Jurecic, Renee DiResta, thank you.